The final tab we're going to look at is monitor areas. So as well as providing predictions on a property level and for each of those individual stock classes, you can also set up these monitor areas. So a monitor area is a particular area of land. It could be a few paddocks or just one paddock that you've grouped together that require management that is different to the rest of your property. It could also be a collection of paddocks that you put aside for a particular mob that you want to manage differently to the rest of its stock class. So to give you an example, let's say this is our farm map. So ASKBILL can give you a prediction for pasture on a whole farm basis, so that's all these paddocks. But you might be particularly interested in what's the pasture doing in these 3 paddocks that you have put aside for your twin-bearing lambing ewes. So you can set these 3 paddocks up as a monitor area, and it will give you predictions for this pasture, and you can also put a mob of lambing ewes in here, and you can monitor exactly what their live weight and condition score predictions are going to be as well. Another use of this monitor area situation might be if you want to set up a grazing crop that you'll put crossbred lambs on to fatten, because that's going to be very different to the rest of your property. It's going to have much higher productivity slider settings, it's going to have a much higher biomass, and you'll want to keep good track of exactly how well these lambs are growing on that crop. Monitor areas can also be used to set up a drought lot or a feed lot, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. The way you set up a monitor area is very similar to setting up a property. So once you're in your Monitor Areas tab, click on Add Monitor Area. This time I'm going to set up a grazing crop. So I'll make this 100% winter active. So because there are no summer active species, this slider bar becomes defunct. I'm going to increase the productivity of this winter pasture because it's a crop, so it's going to grow quite well. And I'll put in a target of 2 tonnes as well because we don't want the sheep getting ahead of the crop. Being a cropping paddock, the soil fertility is going to be quite high. So we've set up our pasture, and now it's asking us to enter our mob. So we'll put some crossbred lambs in here. And what it does is it brings up a list of all the stock classes that you've added previously on the property level, so it saves a lot of time and data entry. So by selecting the fat lambs, it knows that this mob of crossbred lambs have all the same traits and live weights as this mob or this stock class. And you can ignore this for the moment. So this looks exactly the same as at the property level. So if you want to change any weights or how many lambs you have in there, you can click on this button. If you want to change the name of the mob, click on this traits button. Just ignore this one for now. And if you want to change any targets, just click on this button. So to update the quantity or live weight of your lambs, so you would use this to either record a change in the number of stock in that mob or a live weight if you've weighed them recently. So you enter the date that that record was taken. You can either change the quantity by telling it how many you've added or taken away from that mob, or if you have the figures yourself, you can just enter them in directly there. With the live weight, it automatically pre-fills the weight from the last record you have. But if you haven't actually weighed them, I would delete that so that it doesn't try and interfere with the predictions. So you can ignore this one for the moment and just save that. So you can see that the quantity has been updated and the average weight, this is the last recorded live weight that's in there. To look at the history of those live weights and what stock changes you've made over time, go back to the quantity and weight button, click on the stock history tab, and you'll see rows of data where you have your measured live weights and the number of stock on each date. You can edit these if you've made a mistake. or you can delete them altogether, but I don't recommend deleting anything unless it's completely wrong, because the history is important for ASKBILL to make those predictions accurately. Now we have our livestock in there, we can go to the Key Dates tab, and if there are any key dates like shearing or preg scanning that happened on a different date for this mob compared to their stock class, we can change that here. So any dates that you have in at the property level will automatically be applied to this mob. You can delete them, or more easily, you can just edit the date so it's correct for this mob. Same with treatments. If you have any treatments at the property level, they will automatically show up here for this mob, or you can add your own if only this mob got them rather than the whole stock class at the property level. Same for the feed situation as well. If at the property level they're being fed some sort of supplement, that shows up here, where you can add your own. And finally, for irrigation and rainfall, so we have our bomb rainfall in this column. This is the column where you've entered any rainfall that happens on the property. And then this is where you can enter any rainfall that's different to the property for this particular monitor area. So this is useful if this paddock or this monitor area is being irrigated, or if it's way down the end of your property and receives different rainfall to most of the rest of your property. When you're in a monitor area, it does look quite similar in terms of the layout to the property level. So if you're ever not quite sure where you are, just scroll up to the top of the page, and this tells you if you're in the monitor area and which one. And then if you wanted to go back to your property, you can just click on this button here, and it tells you you're at the property level for back brawling. So I'll show you how to set up a monitor area for a feedlot or a drought lot now. So I'm in the monitor areas tab. I'm going to add a new monitor area. We'll call it a feedlot. I'm going to give it a very small area. Doesn't really matter what pasture percentage you use here. I'm going to bring the productivity sliders right down to 0. So basically what I'm trying to do is tell ASKBILL that this feedlot area is very small and it really doesn't grow any pasture, to make sure that the models try and grow as little pasture as possible so it's not going to be contributing to the sheep's diets. I'm also going to give the current pasture availability 0, a target of 0 so we don't get any alerts, reduce soil fertility right down to make sure that that pasture is really not going to grow, and change the soil type to sand and gravel to make the conditions as poor as possible for any pasture growth. So once again, it will ask us to add some stock. Again, I'll put some lambs in here. Ignore this. And now, because our pasture is basically non-existent, we need to add some feed for these sheep. So we'll add a feed record. Now they're going to be fed with self-feeders. They'll have ad lib access to this feed supplement every day, and I'm going to feed them for the next 2 months. So you can enter that end date to some point in the future, and just make sure that if you are going to feed beyond that, that you come back in and change that. So I'll estimate they'll get 1.2 kilos per head per day, and we'll give them some good quality cereal grains. Select the stock class you're feeding and save that one. Now, cereal grains are good for energy, but there's not enough protein in them for growing lambs. So I also want to add a protein seed. So they only get a little bit of that. And I'm going to give them some good quality lupins. So I'm feeding over the same time period as the barley. Apply it to that stock class and save it. So you can see the time period we're feeding, what we're feeding, who we're feeding, and how much we're feeding. So you can add as many different feed types as you want. You could put some hay in there if you want to. You could put in your own custom feed mix, which you've set up at the property level. There's a lot of flexibility in what you choose to put in here. Now that we've set up some monitor mobs, we'll go and have a look at the current risks for those actual mobs and see how they might differ to the property level. So you can see our risk grid has expanded quite a lot. Originally we had the property and the stock classes at the property level, but now we have this grazing crop we set up together, lambing paddocks that I set up another time, and the feedlot that we set up just now. And each of these monitor areas have a particular monitor mob within them. So now AskBill is sending all that new information off to the servers in Armidale to run the calculations, and it will start coming up with some predictions for us. So already we can see that for the feedlot, we're at high risk of not meeting the target that I put in for weight, and we're also at high risk of a worm burden. So we'll have a look at the worms first. Now this is not surprising whatsoever because we have 1,000 lambs on 1 hectare. So if this was an actual pasture situation, those sheep would be depositing a large number of eggs onto that pasture every day. And so the risk of infectivity on that pasture is through the roof. So in a feedlot situation, this risk doesn't really apply. So you may choose to ignore that one. We'll just have a look at our pasture. So just to check that we've given AskBill the right information and it's not trying to grow anything, you can see that at best it's going to grow 12 kilos of pasture per hectare. So I'm pretty happy that it's not going to be contributing to any significant amount to the lamb's feed intake. So it should be modelling their weight quite well. To look at their live weight now. So the reason we're getting a high risk alert for not meeting our target is because the target is pretty ridiculous. I didn't think very much when I put that number in, but if they're only at 30 kilos today, of course there's no way they're going to reach that target. So what we should instead do is go back in and change that target, perhaps move it out to October, and that'll give us a much more reasonable indication of whether the lambs are going to be achieving their target live weight gains or not. You can see there is a small dip in live weight just here, and that's because we've shorn on this date, so you can see the decline in wool weight here as well. And this rather dramatic decline in live weight, that's just because we stopped feeding them on this day. So as far as AskBill's aware, all they've got available is that 12 kilos at pasture, which is obviously not going to do them any favours in terms of live weight gain. Because of the complexity of the modelling that AskBill is trying to do and all the calculations that are involved, it can sometimes take a little bit to show these predictions for you, and that will also depend on the speed of your internet connection. So a little trick you can do if you want to speed up your processing time is you can actually go on this set risks to monitor and deselect any risks that you know you are not interested in. So if you're happy just monitoring these mobs at a monitor area level, then maybe the risks at the property level are not really relevant or accurate, so you can actually turn those off. And that means that they won't be calculated up here, and so you're only trying to calculate a smaller number of risks, and that can make it a little bit faster. Do keep in mind though that if you turn these off, you're not going to get sent any alerts. So if you do have a high worm burden, for example, for these ewes, AskBill can't tell you about it. So just watch out for that one. If you want to change the frequency with which you receive alerts, just go to My Properties, Edit Users, and you'll see a list of all the users that have access to your property. So if you want to invite anyone, so it might be a co-worker or another family member, you can add their email address in here and they'll get access to your property. You can choose whether you want them to edit the property and the monitor areas, view the monitor areas, make payments, or if you don't want them going in there and changing anything, you can just deselect those. So they can only look, but they can't edit anything. You can also set how frequently you want AskBill to send you alerts. So if you don't want any alerts at all, you can just change this to none. So if you want to do that for yourself, just click on Edit next to your name and change that frequency with which you receive alerts. Feed alerts I recommend getting monthly. Worm alerts might be fortnightly. It really depends on how much notice do you need to implement some alternative management to cope with that risk. So it's completely up to you how many alerts you want and how frequently. If you have multiple properties, they will show up here in rows. If you want to edit any information about that property, so the location, you can do that here. And to go into managing that property so you can update your pasture and livestock records, just click on the Manage button. So that's how you use AskBill in a nutshell. There's a fair bit to get your head around, but once you learn where things are and how to get into your monitor areas and where to put treatments and things like that, it becomes a lot easier. So have a go trying out different things, play around with it, see what happens to the risks. And don't forget, the most powerful tool in AskBill is the what if scenarios. So great, this is our predicted outcome, but what are we going to do about it? So it's all about how are you going to change your management to better cope with what the climate and the environment are throwing at you.